Hi, mystery writers. Oh, today I want to talk about something, well, really crucial to your mystery, and that's the detective in the victim's world. And it is a major, major part of your story. It's essentially the whole setup from the time of the inciting incident when your detective takes on the case up to the midpoint of your story where something happens and your detective has to rethink everything they've thought so far. Because this part is where you take your detective and your reader deeper into the story. Um, your detective enters a new world. It's the victim's world. And as they wander the victim's world, they gather bits and pieces of information, they meet suspects, and essentially they experience the victim's environment. And as they do so, they expand their vision and the reader's vision of that victim's world. Your detective at this point is searching and searching. She thinks she knows the victim's world, but then she keeps getting more information and things start to shift. Um, with each discovery, your detector goes deeper into that victim's world until they make a discovery that turns everything around. And this is usually right there toward the midpoint. You want to pay close attention to this section of your story. And here's where many new novelists start sagging, because it's the first part of the middle, right? So avoid trying to rush to the end. I like to think of it as your goal as you're writing this section of your story from the inciting incident to the midpoint is to get to the midpoint. You're building up all this information and your detective is looking at it in a certain way. And at the midpoint, they're going to discover that they've been looking at it the wrong way. It's not that the information is invalid, it's just that your detective has been looking at it from the wrong perspective. So, what you're doing in this section of your story is really setting up the story, giving your reader all the information they need to understand the victim and what was going on, who they interacted with, who the suspects are, um, and 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 so you're really making this a rich part of your story. So don't hurry toward the end. Just build toward the midpoint. So you're going toward the midpoint. That's your goal in this section of the story. Um, Once they take on the case, as it were, um, your detective retreats to review what they know so far, but they're not progressing. They realize they have to go out and discover things, right? And someone, either a suspect or a love interest, or even his opponent, may tell him something that's important, but at this point in time, he overlooks it. So, this is one of the ways you can set up and plan for future events by dropping something in that doesn't seem important at the time, but it was going to have significance later in your story. Um, And then, as your detective goes into that victim's world, they try one of their tried and true methods. You've probably, at the beginning, set up what at least a couple of your detectives' detecting skills are. And in this section of the story, um, they can use one of those skills and they don't work very well. So you've set up at the very beginning, they have this skill, which usually works. And then as they're going into the victim's world and looking at evidence and clues and meeting suspects, they try that skill. And in this particular case, it doesn't work. And you like give your reader a surprise. So they don't think that it's all a slam dunk just because your detective has these skills. I think I'm going into too much detail here. Um, anyway, it's all about setup at this point in time in your story, and then something unexpected happens, and your detective is on it, but they pay a price for being on it. His opponent, for instance, keeps him from taking the next step, or a suspect shows her in spades that she doesn't understand the victim's world at all. This is all building up confusion and creating conflicts for your detective, because however smart and clever they are as a detective, the world just offers them some obstacles. So you get to throw in the obstacles here. So as far as your detective is concerned, from out of left field, a surprise that spills all the puzzle pieces that they have so far, and now they have to improvise and look for something in a new light. And at this point, you're setting up for the midpoint of your story. And then while your detective rearranges all those puzzle pieces that they've gathered so far, exploring the victim's world, your detective sees something new or has an epiphany that tells them they've been looking at the wrong details. It could be that the suspect who seemed like the right one, who seemed like the villain, reveals an alibi that puts them completely out of the picture. Or whatever it is, your detective's still lost in that victim's world and realizes they've been looking at the wrong clues. So that is, at this point, you're at the midpoint of your story, and at the middle of your detective story is a pivot where your detective goes from digging deeper into that victim's world, um, getting closer, and they're going from discovery to trial. All right. They've learned enough for the hunt. They've experienced that victim's world, uh, and they have some idea of who they think that killer might be. Uh, and the middle chapter, that midpoint of your story is high drama and pulls your reader deeper into the story, because everything that the detective and your reader have learned so far has not gotten any results. So now your detective and the reader has to rethink everything they've learned so far about that victim. Um, and then a couple of hints about how to work with this chapter is to focus this chapter. You can make it a mirror of the end or the opposite of the end. So if your detective is successful at the end of the mystery and the midpoint, they're going to be very unsuccessful. Um, uh, so whether your detective has a complete fail or a win, your detective suddenly sees the victim's world in a new way. And you're just launching the story in a new direction. But your detective eventually is going to set on a new path, um, to rethink everything, look for new clues, interview new suspects, and discover more problems, which is the second half of your middle. But it's really important in this first half of your middle up to the midpoint to lay the groundwork, to be careful, to give your reader lots of details, lots of suspicious activities, raising questions. Um, how can I say this? Your detective sees things but overlooks them or misinterprets them. You just have a lot of opportunity for setup. That is what is happening as your detective discovers um, the victim's the victim's world. So take your time. Don't rush to the end. Focus on getting to the middle and the reversal, and make sure that you create that victim's world and the discovery path that your detective takes. Make it full of details, make it full of questions, give your reader lots of things to think about and to wonder about. And, what is this important or is it not important? Or what did that suspect really mean when they said this? This all about setting up for the rest of your story. Okay, I hope that helps. This is such an important part of your story, and if you take the time to fill in all those details and give your reader lots of things to chew on and wonder about, they're going to have a lot more fun feeling like your mystery is mysterious. All right. So please, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and keep writing. I'll see you next week.